The rise and fall of Xerox, the Rochester lab, that invented the future and watched Silicon Valley steal every bit of it. On October 22, 1938, in a converted kitchen on the second floor of 3205 37th Street in Astoria, Queens, a 32-year-old patent clerk named Chester Carlson and an unemployed physicist named Otto Cornay rubbed a cotton handkerchief across a sulfur-coated zinc plate, held a glass slide beneath a bright lamp, and dusted the surface with lycopodium powder. The words that appeared, faint and barely legible, read, 10-22-38 Astoria. It was the first xerographic image ever produced. No corporation funded it. No laboratory backed it. From that single image, made with borrowed equipment in a rented room, would eventually come the copier, the laser printer, the personal computer, the graphical interface, and the mouse. One company would build every one of them, and that company would let nearly all of them walk out the door. You are watching American Electronics and Tech Channel, where we trace the companies that built the electronic world down to the circuit board and the engineer who designed it. If that is your kind of history, subscribe and hit the like button, because the rise of Xerox is only half the story. What it invented and refused to sell is the other half. Chester Floyd Carlson was born in Seattle in 1906 to Swedish immigrant parents. His father had tuberculosis. By 14, Carlson was the family's primary earner. He put himself through the California Institute of Technology on odd jobs and graduated with a degree in physics in 1930, straight into the Depression. He found work at Bell Telephone Laboratories, was laid off, and eventually landed at the electronics firm P.R. Mallory in New York, managing patent filings during the day and attending New York Law School at night. The problem that consumed him was simple and daily. There was no fast, cheap way to copy a patent drawing. Carbon paper smudged. Photographic duplication was slow and expensive. Carlson began reading about photoconductivity, the principle that certain materials change their electrical charge when exposed to light, and he became convinced that a dry copying machine could be built on this phenomenon. He had no funding and no institutional support. What he had was a rented kitchen, a hired assistant, and weekends. The Astoria experiment worked, but nobody wanted it. Carlson patented electrophotography in 1942 and spent the next several years trying to sell the idea. He approached more than 20 companies. IBM passed, General Electric passed, RCA passed. He later described their collective response as an enthusiastic lack of interest. In 1944, the Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, agreed to help develop the technology. 3 years later, a small photographic paper company in Rochester, New York, called the Haloid Company, licensed the process. Haloid's revenues were under $7 million a year. Its president, Joseph C. Wilson, had an MBA from Harvard and a dream of building something as large as the Kodak empire his grandfather had watched rise across Rochester. Wilson saw what IBM could not. He bet the company. To rename the process, Haloid hired a classics professor at Ohio State, who combined the Greek words for dry and writing. The result was xerography. The technology had a name. It still needed a machine that worked. Haloid's first copier, the Model A, arrived in 1949 and required 39 manual steps to produce a single copy. Users called it the Oxbox. It failed. 10 years of refinement followed, a decade spent chasing a fully automatic machine that could copy onto ordinary untreated paper. During those years, Carlson lived in relative poverty, his first marriage already over, his only income a modest consultant's fee. Wilson pushed forward, pouring money the company barely had into development. In August 1959, he wrote a letter to his division heads. "We are about to give birth, either to our greatest success or to our greatest failure." The machine he was describing had a sticker price of $29,500, a sum so enormous that Wilson knew outright sales would never work. So he chose to lease the machines instead, a decision he later called the most important the company ever made, after backing xerography itself. On September 16, 1959, at the Sherry Netherland Hotel in New York, Haloid Xerox demonstrated the Xerox 914 on live television. One of the two copiers present caught fire during the demonstration. It did not matter. The 914 was the first automatic plain paper copier in the world. The machine weighed 648 pounds. It had to be turned on its side to fit through doorways. It required a nationwide force of service technicians and shipped with a small carbon dioxide fire extinguisher labeled with corporate understatement, the Scorch Eliminator. Operators were warned not to show fear around the machine because it would, according to one Xerox technician, sense it and misbehave. None of this slowed the orders. Xerox leased the 914 for $95 a month, which included 2,000 free copies, with a charge of 4 cents for every copy after that. The average customer made roughly 8,000 copies a month. Revenue went from $32 million in 1959 to nearly $60 million by 1961, past $500 million by 1966, and past $1 billion by 1970. Fortune called the 914 the most successful product ever marketed in America, measured by return on investment. Over 200,000 units were built before production ended in 1976. One sits today in the Smithsonian. The copier made Xerox the dominant force in American business. But two things were already happening that would define everything to come. Chester Carlson died of a heart attack on September 19, 1968, at the age of 62, in a movie theater on West 57th Street in New York. By then, he had quietly given away more than $150 million to civil rights organizations, integrated housing projects, and the United Nations. A year before he died, his wife asked if he had any unfulfilled desires. "Just one," he said. "I would like to die a poor man." Joseph Wilson died 3 years later of a heart attack while lunching with Governor Nelson Rockefeller. The two men who built Xerox were gone. And in a building 3,000 miles from Rochester, a different kind of invention was already taking shape. In 1970, Xerox chief scientist Jack Goldman founded the Palo Alto Research Center in California. He hired George Paik, a physicist from Washington University, as director, and Paik's first major recruitment was Robert Taylor, former director of ARPA's Information Processing Office, who had helped fund the most important computer research of the previous decade. Taylor recruited with precision. Butler Lampson came from the collapsed Berkeley Computer Corporation. Alan Kay arrived from the University of Utah. Chuck Thacker, Gary Starkweather, Larry Tesler, Robert Metcalf, David Boggs, Adele Goldberg. By the mid-70s, PARC employed what colleagues estimated were 50 of the top 100 computer scientists in America, all gathered in a building near Stanford. Funded by copier profits and given nearly total intellectual freedom. Meanwhile, those copier profits were under siege. The Federal Trade Commission forced Xerox in 1975 to license its key patents to competitors. Canon, Ricoh, and Minolta entered the American market with machines that were cheaper and increasingly reliable. Xerox's share of the American copier market fell from 86% in 1974 to just 17% by 1984. Profits dropped from $1.15 billion to $290 million in the same span. The copier empire was bleeding out, and inside PARC, sitting on desks that Rochester executives rarely visited, the engineers had already built what could have replaced it. The Xerox Alto, completed in 1973, was the first personal computer built around a graphical user interface. It had a mouse. It had a bitmap display capable of rendering text and images on the same screen. It had windows, icons, and folders arranged on a desktop metaphor that would become the foundation of every operating system built in the next half-century. About 2,000 units were made. They were used inside Xerox and at a handful of universities. They were never released to the public. Gary Starkweather invented the laser printer in 1969 while working at Xerox's Webster facility near Rochester. His managers told him to stop. The copier division saw no use for a printer that took instructions from a computer. Goldman intervened and transferred Starkweather to PARC, away from corporate oversight. Within 9 months, Starkweather had built the first working laser printer. Xerox did not bring a commercial model to market until 1977 with the Xerox 9700. It became a multi-billion-dollar product line and the most profitable innovation to come out of PARC, one that the company had nearly killed in its infancy. Robert Metcalfe and David Boggs, working at PARC in the mid-70s, invented Ethernet, the networking standard that would eventually connect every office and campus in the world. By the middle of the decade, PARC researchers were using the Alto to send electronic mail, edit documents in a WYSIWYG word processor, and print them on a laser printer over an Ethernet network. They were living every working day inside the future. Xerox management looked at all of this and saw expensive machines with no connection to selling copiers. In 1981, Xerox finally commercialized a version of the Alto's ideas in the Xerox Star 8010, a workstation that cost up to $100,000 for a full office system. It was too expensive, too late, and aimed at the wrong market. The Star sold poorly. And one by one, the researchers who had built the future began to leave. In December 1979, Steve Jobs visited PARC. The arrangement was straightforward. Xerox could buy 100,000 shares of Apple stock for $1 million, and PARC would open its doors. Adele Goldberg, one of PARC's lead researchers, refused to give the demonstration, suspecting that Apple would appropriate the work. Xerox management overruled her. An engineer named Larry Tesler showed Jobs the Alto. He moved a cursor with a mouse. He opened and closed windows. He clicked on icons. Jobs returned to Apple and demanded that his team build what he had seen. You can read that visit 2 ways, and Honest History holds both of them at once. Apple engineers had already been working on graphical interfaces before the visit, and PARC had openly demonstrated the Alto to more than 2,000 outside visitors by 1975. The ideas were not hidden, but the visit crystallized everything. The Apple Lisa followed in 1983, the Macintosh in 1984, Microsoft Windows after that. Tesler left for Apple. John Warnock and Chuck Geschke left to co-found Adobe. Charles Simonyi left for Microsoft. The engineers who built the future walked out of PARC and handed it to Silicon Valley because Xerox would not sell what Xerox had made. David Kearns, who became CEO in 1982, led a disciplined recovery of the copier business and eventually won the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award in 1989. But the copier turnaround could not replace what PARC had offered, and the boardroom had declined. Xerox never became the computing company its own lab had already built. PARC was spun off as an independent subsidiary in 2002. In 2023, Xerox donated the lab to SRI International and kept most of the patents. The numbers close the argument. In 1998, Xerox had a market capitalization of roughly $36 billion. As of mid-2026, that figure is approximately $400 million. A decline of more than 99%. The stock trades near $3 a share. A company that once made copy and Xerox synonymous can now be purchased on paper for less than the cost of a single office tower in Palo Alto. But the machines outlived the corporation that refused to sell them. Every laser printer on Earth descends from Starkweather's prototype. Every Ethernet cable traces back to Metcalfe and Boggs at PARC. Every graphical interface, every icon, every clickable folder on every screen owes a debt to the Alto and to Chuck Thacker and Alan Kay and the engineers who built it in a building funded by copier money. 4 PARC researchers have won the Turing Award. The Alto sits in the Computer History Museum. The 914 sits in the Smithsonian. The inventions Xerox gave away are now worth collectively trillions of dollars, running under the names Apple, Microsoft, Adobe, and 1,000 others that carry PARC DNA without ever saying so. In a converted kitchen in Astoria, Queens, in 1938, a patent clerk rubbed a handkerchief across a zinc plate and watched 5 faint characters appear in powder. 10-22-38 Astoria. That process, light striking a charged surface and dry powder, making the invisible visible, still runs inside every copier and laser printer on the planet. Chester Carlson's invention did not disappear. It conquered the world. It simply did it under other names, because the company that owned it could never imagine becoming anything other than what it already was. Xerox did not fail to see the future. Xerox built the future, demonstrated the future, and shipped it to a building 3,000 miles from the boardroom that could have sold it to the world. Think about what that means in concrete terms. When Steve Jobs stood on stage in 1984 and introduced the Macintosh, the graphical interface he was selling had been running on Xerox hardware for more than a decade. When Microsoft shipped Windows 1.0 a year later, the concepts it borrowed, overlapping windows, pull-down menus, scroll bars, all of them had been prototyped, tested, debugged, and used daily by PARC engineers who printed their documents on laser printers and sent them over Ethernet to colleagues down the hall. When John Warnock and Chuck Geschke founded Adobe in 1982, the page description language they built into PostScript drew directly on the work they had done inside PARC on the Interpress standard. Every one of these billion-dollar enterprises began with technology that Xerox had already paid for, already built, and already demonstrated to anyone willing to walk through the door. The irony is not that Xerox failed to innovate. The irony is that Xerox innovated more successfully than almost any corporation in the 20th century, and then treated its own innovations as distractions. The copier division in Rochester generated the revenue. The copier division set the priorities. And the copier division saw a personal computer the way a locomotive manufacturer might have looked at an airplane. Interesting, possibly clever, but not our business. Jack Goldman had placed PARC in California deliberately, 3,000 miles from Rochester, so that his researchers could think without interference. The distance worked exactly as intended. The engineers thought freely, built brilliantly, and produced a suite of technologies that would have made Xerox the most powerful company in the history of computing. But 3,000 miles also meant that the executives who controlled the budget rarely saw the machines, rarely used the machines, and never fully understood what the machines could become. There is a question that business historians have debated for decades, and it is worth stating plainly. Could Xerox have become Apple? Could it have become Microsoft? The answer, almost certainly, is yes. Not because the technology was ready for a mass consumer market in 1975. It was not. The Alto cost roughly $12,000 per unit to manufacture, at a time when the average American car sold for about $4,000. But Xerox had something that Apple did not have in 1976, and that Microsoft did not have in 1980. It had cash flow. The copier business, even in decline, was generating hundreds of millions of dollars a year. It had a global sales and service infrastructure that reached every major corporation on the planet. It had brand recognition that no startup could match. And it had, sitting in a building in Palo Alto, the single greatest concentration of computing talent ever assembled under one corporate roof. What it lacked was the willingness to see itself as something new. That is the lesson Xerox teaches, and it is not a comfortable one. Innovation alone does not win. Resistance to innovation does not come only from ignorance. The executives who ran Xerox in the 1970s and 80s were not stupid men. They were experienced, successful managers of a company that had grown from $7 million in revenue to more than $8 billion in 2 decades. They understood markets. They understood operations. They understood the copier business down to the service call and the toner cartridge. What they could not do was imagine dismantling the very thing that had made them successful in order to build something that might or might not replace it. That is the hardest decision any corporation ever faces, and Xerox is the clearest example in American history of what happens when the answer is no. Chester Carlson never saw the Alto. He never used a mouse. He never clicked an icon or opened a window on a bitmap display. He died 10 years before his company built the machine that would define the future of computing, in a movie theater on West 57th Street, alone. With more than $150 million already given away to causes he believed in and nothing left to prove. Joseph Wilson never saw PARC reach its peak. He died in 1971, a year after the lab opened, still believing that Xerox would become the company of the future. Both men understood something that the generation of managers who followed them did not. They understood that the point of a company is not to protect what it already has. The point is to become what it has not yet imagined. Carlson imagined dry copying when every expert told him it was impossible. Wilson bet a $7 million company on a technology that had failed for a decade. They took the leap, their successors would not. If you worked at PARC, at the Rochester plant, or on any Xerox machine from the 914 to the Star, drop a comment below. Tell us the model, the year, and whether it still runs. The engineers who built these machines and the people who used them know more about what was lost than the executives who let it go. Subscribe if you want to keep digging into these stories, because this channel is building an archive of the companies that shaped the electronic age. We have the story of another American tech empire coming next, and you will not want to miss how it ends.